Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Epical Minds. Have you ever wondered what truly shaped Albert Einstein beyond the famous equations? Though we all know E equals mc squared, historians still debate how his personal passions and relationships influenced his groundbreaking work. In fact, there's so much about his life that remains hidden behind the veil of legend and lore. Before we dive into this incredible journey, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy discovering the stories behind the greatest minds in history. Share your thoughts or any questions you have in the comments below. Now, let's step back in time and explore the full story of 2 Hours with Einstein, the untold story of his life, love, and legacy. He arrives in the world on March 14th, 1879, in the small German city of Ulm, a place that most people today might scroll past on a muted map app. And yet this unassuming town is where a restless curiosity first flickers to life. From the very beginning, he's a peculiar child. Widely accepted historical records note his birth into a secular Jewish family headed by Hermann and Pauline Einstein, and by the age of 3, he still hadn't uttered his first words. Historians still debate whether this late speech reflected a developmental delay or simply a fiercely introspective temperament. Whatever the cause, his family grows quietly concerned as their son watches them with wide, contemplative eyes, absorbing every nuance of a world that to him feels brimming with secret patterns. By the time he's 5, he's entranced by his father's pocket compass. One evening, his nanny tells him it's just a toy. Yet when he cradles the instrument in his small hand, he can't shake the wonder that an invisible force guides that tiny needle. He pores over that compass as if it were a magic wand, and in that moment, he experiences what he later describes as a holy curiosity, a term that hints at an almost spiritual connection to the hidden laws of nature. In modern terms, it's as if he's a kid who stumbles across the first prototype of a smartphone, marveling not at the flashy display, but at the invisible network signals that promise communication across oceans. School days in Ulm prove more complicated. He enrolls in the Luitpold Gymnasium at 8, where rote memorization and strict discipline clash with his freewheeling imagination. He's branded a daydreamer, a kid with messy hair who drifts off mid-lesson. One lesser-known detail: he writes his early musings in tiny notebooks, filling margins with sketches of light beams and angles, precursors to thought experiments that will later revolutionize physics. His teachers scold him for pedantic questioning. Why is the sky blue? Why does a spinning top wobble? Today, we'd praise that kind of inquiry as the hallmark of a gifted student. But back then, he's just a curious boy who can't sit still. Amid the strict Prussian curriculum, he finds solace in his mother's homemade violin lessons. At home, Pauline cradles a battered violin and teaches him folk tunes. He fumbles at first, but soon he's coaxing melody from those 4 strings. Music becomes an unexpected laboratory of patterns and harmonies, a playful counterpoint to the rigid drills of his classroom. He'll say years later that if he hadn't become a physicist, he might have been a composer, another quirky detail that drives home how multifaceted his intellect truly is. Yet even then, he experiments at the crossroads of art and science, pondering how vibrations of a violin string mimic the oscillations of light waves. In his adolescence, the family uproots and moves to Munich, where his father opens an electrical engineering business. The transition brings both opportunity and new challenges. The older he gets, the more he chafes against authoritarian teaching styles. He finds kindred spirits in the family's lodgers, a group of medical students who stay late into the night debating philosophy and Kantian metaphysics. It's in their smoky parlors that he first hears of Hermann von Helmholtz's theories on conservation of energy. He devours their borrowed textbooks and engages in heated discussions about whether time itself flows or stands still, an early hint of his future preoccupations. Historians still debate whether these informal seminars or later self-study had a larger impact on his scientific trajectory, but there's no question they fuel his imagination. Outside the lecture halls, he cultivates a love for sailing on the Ammersee, building a wooden boat with local craftsmen. He sails without an engine, perhaps the only time in his life he feels utterly free of constraints. There, bathed in sunlight and wind, he envisions gliding alongside a beam of light itself, chasing it faster and faster over the water. In modern analogies, this is akin to a teenager today programming an early drone to outpace a speeding car, an audacious experiment that hints at the boundaries he will later push in Relativity. Back in the city, he befriends a handful of artists and musicians, sharing sketches and serenading neighbors with improvised violin duets. One day, he places a mirror in the path of sunlight and traces the reflected arc on paper, marveling at the dignity of a pristine curve. To him, even the simplest mirror experiment reveals a universe of immaculate geometry, a universe he feels compelled to understand. Those around him chuckle at his obsessive note-taking, but this mania is precisely what drives his quest to uncover nature's deepest rules. When he turns 16, he confronts a crisis. His father's business fails, and the family teeters on financial ruin. He contemplates abandoning his scientific dreams to become an electrical technician, driven by necessity rather than passion. In letters he writes to a school friend, he confesses to restless nights spent scribbling equations by candlelight, equations that hint at the principle of relativity before he even names it. This tension between practicality and imagination will shadow him throughout his life, a theme that scholars still debate. Did his brief flirtation with engineering conservatism influence his later insistence on thought experiments rather than laboratory work? Yet he persists. In a final act of youthful rebellion, he fails his school exams deliberately, refusing to memorize petty details, but excels in physics and mathematics, demonstrating that his mind thrives on big ideas rather than small facts. His teachers are outraged, but the outcome is inevitable. He gains admission to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, where rules are looser and intellectual curiosity is welcomed. As he departs Ulm and Munich behind, he carries with him a mosaic of experiences: family tensions, musical experiments, student debates, and solitary reflections on light and time. Each fragment will feed into the force of his later breakthroughs, like tributaries converging into a river that will flow inexorably toward radical insights. From that curious boy in Ulm emerges a scientist willing to challenge every assumption. He still listens to his inner compass, the same fascination that flickered first in his infant hand at his father's compass. And as he sets out for Zurich, he remains, above all, a seeker, driven by a belief that nature's hidden chords can be plucked into revelation. Historians still debate whether it was this early encounter with cosmic mystery or his later academic mentors that truly set his course, but one quirky truth shines through. Even at 7, he was convinced that the universe speaks in symbols, and he was determined to learn its language. He begins his 23rd year in 1902, stepping into the austere hallways of the Swiss Patent Office in Bern, a position as far removed from ivory tower academia as one could imagine. Widely accepted historical records confirm that after graduating from the Swiss Federal Polytechnic, he accepts the role of technical expert third class, tasked with evaluating patent applications for everything from electromagnetic devices to hair-curling irons. Historians still debate whether this bureaucratic humdrum actually sharpened his mind more than a university professorship would have. But there's no question that the office becomes his unlikely laboratory. By day, he's immersed in evaluating blueprints and legal jargon. By night, he's composing thought experiments that will transform physics. One quirky detail: he keeps a worn leather briefcase so stuffed with papers that the latch breaks regularly, prompting him to seal it with twine. His colleagues tease him about the haphazard bundle, yet it contains the seeds of revolutionary ideas: half-drafted manuscripts, sketches of light clocks, and scribbled notes comparing electromagnetic wave equations. In that clutter, he treats patent documents as puzzles, dissecting the principles behind each invention and spotting logical inconsistencies that train his critical eye. The patent office's weekly breaks offer odd rituals that punctuate his routine. On Wednesdays and Fridays at precisely 5 o'clock, he joins a circle of clerks for a brisk walk around the city's historic arcades. They stroll past the Zittgloge clock tower, its 15th-century mechanism chiming reminders that time itself is inseparable from mechanics. During these walks, he shares cryptic insights about how the ticking gears might relate to the relativity of time, an unorthodox lunchtime lecture that leaves co-workers bewildered but intrigued. One lesser-known detail: he once attempted to build a miniature replica of the tower using cigar boxes and spare watch parts, only to abandon it when he realized the gear ratios were all wrong. Behind his reserved demeanor, he cultivates an inner world of mental experiments. He imagines chasing a beam of light through the streets of Bern, wondering whether, at light speed, he would see a stationary electromagnetic wave, an idea so audacious that it draws laughter when he mentions it in casual conversation. Today, that anecdote reads like the first hint of what becomes special relativity, and I'll show you how pivotal it is. Historians still debate whether this particular thought experiment first surfaces in his mind at the patent office or during the lectures he audits at university libraries, but its impact on his later papers is undeniably profound. Outside work hours, he forms a modest reading group with two friends, one a lawyer, the other a mechanical engineer. They meet at a coffee house near the Bahnhofplatz, ordering dark roast and pumpernickel bread, poring over Maxwell's treatise on electricity and magnetism. He corrects a misprint in the printed equations, earning a surprised "by Jove" from the engineer friend. It's a quirky moment, the future architect of relativity grinning over a typographical error. Over steaming cups, they debate whether the ether is necessary to transmit light waves, a question at the heart of contemporary physics. He champions the radical idea that the ether is superfluous, a position that elicits incredulous looks and sets the stage for his 1905 challenge to the scientific establishment. In his small dorm room above the office, he pins sheets of manuscript to the wall, grouping pages by topic: electrodynamics, molecular kinetics, and statistical mechanics. Lamps flicker as he works late into the night, headphones clamped over his ears playing Mozart quartets, another quirky detail suggesting that music and science intertwine in his mind. He drafts 5 papers in rapid succession on the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, and the equivalence of mass and energy. Though most people associate these miracle year breakthroughs with 1905, he begins sketching their foundations here, during stolen moments at the patent office. Routine correspondence with academic mentors sustains his momentum. He writes to his former professor, Heinrich Weber, requesting recommendations for publication. In one letter, he refers to himself as a humble examiner of patents, a self-effacing description that belies his torrential creativity. Weber's lukewarm support, far from effusive endorsement, drives him to seek other channels, eventually leading to Bern's Annalen der Physik publishing his papers. Historians still debate whether Weber's hesitance stemmed from jealousy or genuine concern over Einstein's unconventional methods. But the delay only sharpens Einstein's resolve. Occasionally, he retreats to the quiet banks of the Aar River, where he sits on a wooden bench sketching diagrams with a stub of pencil. He watches swans glide by, noting how their reflections distort in rippling water, a real-world analogy for the curvature of space-time he will later describe. It's an everyday scene that seeds profound insight. Shimmering swan reflections become metaphors he revisits in lectures decades later. That quirky season of riverbank contemplation underscores how he finds cosmic meaning in ordinary moments. Despite his burgeoning ideas, he knows the world takes time to catch up. He keeps his revolutionary thoughts mostly under wraps, sharing them only with trusted friends who call him Der Professor in jest. In private letters, he confesses anxious nights worrying that the scientific community will dismiss his work. Yet, paradoxically, the very freedom of his patent office role, unburdened by teaching duties and departmental politics, gives him the space to think expansively. In modern terms, it's like a software engineer moonlighting on open-source projects, untethered by corporate constraints. As he closes his desk drawer on another hectic day, he pauses to watch the last light fade over Bern's rooftops, reflecting on the strange fortune that a patent clerk could rewrite the laws of physics. He carries his twine-bound briefcase home, its papers promising more than inventions. They promise a revolution. And so, amid the quiet clatter of expired patents and dismissed inventions, he fashions ideas that will ripple through time. Historians still debate the precise timeline of how these concepts coalesced into published form. But one thing is certain. From the humblest of offices, he charts a course toward changing our understanding of reality itself. In the spring of 1905, at the age of 26, he unleashes what will be called his miracle year, publishing 4 papers that redefine space, time, and the very nature of light. Widely accepted historical fact holds that between March and September of that year, he submits landmark manuscripts on the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, special relativity, and the equivalence of mass and energy. Historians still debate whether he intended them as a cohesive package or viewed each as an isolated insight, but together they form a seismic shift in physics. The first paper, on a heuristic viewpoint concerning the production and transformation of light, tackles the photoelectric effect. Here, he argues that light behaves as discrete quanta, what we now call photons, an idea so radical that contemporary critics dismiss it as a mathematical trick. A quirky detail. He writes this paper on thin onion skin stationery, pinning each translucent sheet together in his cramped apartment above the patent office. The stationery's fragility mirrors the fragility of prevailing theories, and he later jokes to a friend that his ideas are just as delicate until proven robust by experiment. Next comes On the Motion of Small Particles Suspended in Liquids at Rest Required by the Molecular Kinetic Theory of Heat, addressing Brownian motion. In it, he analyzes the jittery dance of pollen grains in water, providing concrete proof of atoms' existence at a time when some scientists still questioned their reality. He includes an odd analogy, likening the grain's erratic shifts to the random footsteps of dancers in a crowded ballroom. It's a whimsical flourish that humanizes an otherwise abstract statistical treatment. Then, perhaps his most famous contribution, on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, introduces special relativity. He proposes that the laws of physics remain constant for all observers in uniform motion, and that the speed of light is absolute. Lesser known but instructive is his thought experiment. Imagining two lightning bolts striking the ends of a moving train and questioning whether observers on the train and on the embankment perceive the strikes simultaneously. He sketches this scenario on the back of a train ticket, an impulsive act that transforms a mundane souvenir into a cornerstone of modern physics. Finally, in Does the Inertia of a Body Depend Upon Its Energy Content? He deduces E equals mc squared, encapsulating the profound idea that mass and energy are interchangeable. One quirky detail emerges from correspondence with his fiancée, Mileva. He jokes that his equation makes housework a form of nuclear physics, quipping that burning wood in the fireplace demonstrates mass-to-energy conversion on a small scale. Historians still debate how personally invested Mileva was in his early scientific work, but her presence in his letters suggests she was both confidant and critic. Although published in Annalen der Physik, these papers garner scant attention at first. Buried amid more pedestrian research, he receives only a handful of congratulatory letters, including one from Max Planck, who recognizes the relativity paper's potential. Yet the academic establishment largely overlooks the others. In a diary entry, he laments that his little thought experiments are lost in the din of routine scholarship. Nevertheless, that modest initial reception fuels his resilience rather than discourages him. By the end of 1905, he steps back to assess the impact. He refers to his papers as a small collection of notes, underplaying their magnitude. In another quirky aside, he writes to a cousin that his work is less like uprooting a tree and more like trimming a hedge, yet the hedge in question spans the cosmos. This humility contrasts sharply with the revolutionary content of his ideas. Elsewhere, he celebrates with friends in Burns taverns, sipping a glass of local cider, an unexpected detail given his later reputation for sobriety. He laughs loudly as he recounts how critics call his relativity philosophical speculation. But in that laughter lurks confidence. He knows his ideas will endure because they stem from core principles, not mere mathematical manipulation. Historians still debate the precise sequence in which he conceived these breakthroughs, whether the relativity thought experiment preceded the photoelectric quantization or vice versa. But one thing is clear: the miracle year marks the climax of his patent office tenure. It is here that his solitary reflections in the evenings converge with the public act of publication, forging a new era in how humanity conceives of reality. Following his 1905 triumphs, he embarks on an often overlooked journey through academia's gates, facing both doors of opportunity and walls of resistance. Widely accepted historical records show that between 1906 and 1911, he moves through a series of positions, first as a lecturer in Bern, then as associate professor at the University of Zurich, and finally as a full professor at the Charles University in Prague, before securing a prestigious post at the German University in Prague. Historians still debate whether this rapid progression reflects his undeniable genius or simply his strategic networking with influential mentors. At each institution, he confronts entrenched skepticism. In Bern, his inaugural lecture on relativity draws a sparse audience. Colleagues murmur that his ideas are too speculative. One quirky detail: he delivers his first Prague lectures wearing 2 pairs of socks. He claims the castle's old stone floors are deceptively cold, though some suspect he's merely eccentric. Yet this cold-clad quirkiness belies a sharper weapon: his clarifying analogies. He famously compares time dilation to the effect of a delayed film reel, making a complex mathematical derivation feel as intuitive as watching a slowed-down movie. In Zurich, he finds a more receptive audience under the mentorship of Alfred Kleiner, who encourages him to refine his mathematical formalism. During late-night discussions at Kleiner's home, they experiment with tensor calculus, an arcane branch of mathematics that will prove crucial for general relativity. A lesser-known detail. Einstein doodles a caricature of Kleiner as a rubber ruler bending under the weight of equations, a drawing that survives in a university archive. These sessions ignite his ambition to generalize relativity beyond inertial frames, envisioning gravity itself as geometry. Prague introduces fresh challenges. As the youngest professor in the faculty, he's tasked with teaching classes double the size of his Bern seminars. He improvises, turning his lectures into Socratic dialogues, posing questions on the blackboard and inviting students to propose answers. One student recalls that he would pause mid-equation to let the room ponder, creating a collective hush before guiding them toward the resolution. This interactive style is a quirky precursor to modern active learning techniques, long before pedagogy embraced them. Yet institutional limits frustrate him. Prague's physicists are more interested in spectroscopy than spacetime. He grows restless, scribbling thoughts in the margins of library books, jotting ideas about gravitational redshift and the equivalence principle. He sends letters back to Zurich requesting advanced texts on differential geometry, underscoring his self-driven quest. Historians still debate whether this period of peripheral engagement or his formal collaborations most influenced his leap to general relativity. By 1911, his reputation precedes him as he accepts a chair at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, succeeding his mentor Minkowski, whose geometric interpretation of relativity had fueled Einstein's strides. In a quirky twist, he replaces Minkowski's chalkboard with a state-of-the-art blackboard imported from Prague, insisting on its superior surface for drawing curvature diagrams. That very blackboard becomes the stage for his first public articulation of the field equations of general relativity in 1912. Words that echo through physics to this day. Throughout these years, he weaves personal and professional threads. His correspondence with Mileva carries on, blended with scientific kernels. He addresses her as my confidant in both love and equations. Historians still debate how much she contributed mathematically, but her presence in his letters reveals an emotional support network crucial during these formative academic trials. By the time he leaves academia's revolving doors for a permanent position at the German university in Prague, he's honed not just his theories, but his teaching, collaboration style, and perseverance. These years serve as the crucible in which solitary thought experiments meet collective scrutiny, shaping both the man and the scientist he becomes. His personal life intertwines with his scientific journey most poignantly through his relationship with Mileva Maric, the only woman in his Zurich physics cohort and a brilliant mind in her own right. Widely accepted historical fact records that they meet in 1896 at the Swiss Federal Polytechnic and form a close bond over mathematics and physics. Historians still debate the extent of her intellectual contributions to his early work, but correspondence between them reveals a partnership that mixes scholarly rigor with emotional complexity. In those early years, they pore over textbooks side by side in Zurich's dimly lit study halls, sharing notes on Maxwell's equations and tensor transformations. Mileva, a Serbian physicist, often challenges his assumptions, scribbling corrections in the margins of his drafts. A quirky detail emerges in an intimate letter. She teases him for wearing mismatched shoes to an exam, one black, one brown, prompting him to quip that practical attire pales next to theoretical elegance. Their banter feels like a laboratory experiment in interpersonal chemistry, testing how love and logic can coexist. By 1902, their friendship deepens into romance. He writes to her, "Your presence is to my mind what the ether was to light," an evocative simile that underscores his tendency to view relationships through scientific metaphors. They become engaged in 1903, sharing a rented attic room where they burn midnight oil, drafting thought experiments, and debating atomic theory. One lesser-known anecdote recalls a homemade wager. They predict whether a pendulum's period would change if moved from Zurich to Bern, betting a bottle of cherry cordial on the outcome. Their wager, though never formally recorded, signifies the playful enmeshment of their intellectual and romantic lives. Yet beneath the shared excitement, tensions surface. Mileva grapples with the societal constraints facing women in academia. While he breezes through patent reviews and paper writing, she faces the looming reality of being a wife and mother, expected to sideline her own ambitions. In a poignant letter from 1904, she laments sleepless nights spent caring for their infant son, Hans Albert, while he retreats into theoretical realms. Historians still debate whether this domestic strain influenced his decision to underplay her scientific role in his publications, but it undeniably marks a fracture in their collaboration. Their marriage in early 1903 brings both comfort and conflict. They relocate to Bern, and he shares his most intense miracle year breakthroughs with her before sending papers to Annalen der Physik. One quirky detail: he gifts her a set of engraved pens for her contribution to proofreading his manuscripts, acknowledging her as an editorial partner, albeit in private. Yet to the wider world, his name alone adorns the papers. Scholars still debate whether Mileva co-authored portions of those 1905 papers, but their personal letters hint at hours spent jointly refining equations. As fame begins to stir, so do insecurities. He travels more for lectures, leaving Mileva at home with financial anxieties and the children. Their second child, Edward, is born in 1910 and later shows signs of mental illness, another source of strain in an already tense household. He writes from afar, promising support, yet historians still debate whether his emotional distance exacerbated her isolation. In a private diary entry, she describes walking alone by the Aar River, clutching letters from her husband that oscillate between affectionate reassurance and distant scientific updates. By 1914, at the brink of his appointment in Berlin, their relationship has frayed. Political turmoil looms in Europe, and his move to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute offers career prestige but demands relocation. Mileva and the boys stay behind initially, heightening household pressure. One quirky anecdote recalls her attempt to pack his violin alongside manuscripts, an act reflecting her constant juggling of his personal and professional worlds. Yet the same act underscores her marginalization. The violin, uncredited, takes precedence over her own academic pursuits. Their separation in 1914 and eventual divorce in 1919 lay bare the collision of love and ambition. He agrees to assign future Nobel Prize money to Mileva and the children, a pragmatic settlement that speaks to his sense of responsibility. Historians still debate the fairness and motivation behind this arrangement, whether it reflects guilt, generosity, or social convention, but it cements the end of their partnership. In private letters, he expresses sorrow and longing, calling her the one who understands my mind. Yet professional demands pull him inexorably forward. Despite their separation, the impact of their collaboration lingers. Mileva continues to support their son's education, and he, decades later, acknowledges in a rare 1934 letter that her sharp intellect and steadfast support were crucial during his formative years. A quirky postscript. She keeps his framed Nobel diploma on her wall long after their divorce, a silent testament to their intertwined legacy. This chapter of his life reveals how personal relationships can fuel and fracture genius, blending love's warmth with the chill of academic rigor. Historians still debate whether the pressures of marriage and motherhood stifled her potential or merely shifted her contributions into the private sphere. What remains clear is that their union, though ultimately undone by circumstance and ambition, set the emotional and intellectual stage for his greatest breakthroughs and left an indelible mark on both their lives. As news of his 1905 papers spreads, he ascends into European fame, becoming both celebrated and scrutinized in equal measure. Widely accepted historical fact shows that by 1909 he's appointed full professor at the University of Zurich, and in 1911 the French Academy of Sciences awards him the Prix Jules Janssen. Historians still debate whether the public accolades or the growing chorus of academic skeptics most influenced his subsequent work. But the stage is now set for a wider audience to witness and question his revolutionary ideas. At conferences across the continent, he finds himself at the center of animated debates. One quirky detail. During a Paris symposium on the quantum, he snacks on baguette and, uncharacteristically, drizzles mustard on it, prompting gasps from refined colleagues. He later quips that if mustard can't change the flavor of bread, how can conventional wisdom resist a dash of new theory? His humorous analogy underscores his belief in shaking up established tastes. In Berlin's lecture halls, audiences swell to hundreds, far larger than his early Zurich seminars. He delivers talks on special relativity using a simple demonstration: two synchronized metronomes on a pendulum frame, one speeding up, one slowing down, to illustrate time dilation. The visual impact is undeniable, even to skeptics who call it a party trick. Yet after each demonstration, he calmly dismantles objections with mathematical rigor, inviting critics into the equations rather than dismissing them outright. It's a teaching style that fuses showmanship with substance. Meanwhile, the press seizes on his celebrity. Newspapers label him the wandering genius, and cartoonists depict him with wild hair and a protruding tongue, an image based on a playful portrait he once submitted to friends. One lesser-known detail: he loathes the caricatures, finding them reductive, but he secretly enjoys seeing how artists exaggerate his expressions. He collects the cartoons in a scrapbook, alongside newspaper clippings of his lectures. Yet not everyone is convinced. At the 1911 Solvay conference, he encounters skeptics such as Henri Poincaré and Paul Langevin. They challenge the absoluteness of light speed and the rejection of the luminiferous ether. During one heated exchange, he paces the room, drawing space-time diagrams in the air with chalk dust from his sleeve. The room falls silent as he articulates the principle of relativity, and for a moment, the debate transcends hostility, becoming a shared search for truth. Historians still debate which moment at Solvay most turned the tide toward acceptance, but the conference undeniably cements his status among physics' elite. Across the Rhine, Max Planck emerges as a staunch ally, defending the photoelectric paper and championing quantum theory's potential. In a quirky aside, Einstein gifts Planck a walking stick inscribed with "To my friend in energy," a pun reflecting their shared interest in mass-energy equivalence. Their correspondence reveals mutual respect. Planck insists on calling Einstein "professor," even after Einstein outranks him. The broader public also engages, though through a filtered lens. Popular science books begin featuring his name and theories, though often simplified. One paperback labels special relativity as time travel for scientists, a sensational hook that he privately despises. Yet he appreciates the heightened interest in science, believing public curiosity to be the first step toward progress. He once tells a reporter that if his work spurs someone in India or Brazil to question their world, he's fulfilled his mission, an inclusive vision rare for his era. By the end of this period, his ideas spark secondary research streams. Physicists study gravitational redshift, photoelectric experiments multiply across Europe, and philosophical circles ponder the implications for free will and determinism. Historians still debate whether the debates themselves sharpened his formulations or distracted him from deeper unification efforts. But there's no question that controversy fuels progress. Through laughter in Paris cafés, chalk-dusted demonstrations in Berlin, and spirited dialogues at Solvay, he transforms from a solitary patent clerk into a public intellectual whose theories and persona captivate a continent. As the 1920s unfold, political tides shift ominously, and he finds himself navigating the treacherous waters of rising fascism in Europe. Widely accepted historical fact shows that in 1933, after Adolf Hitler's ascent to power, he resigns from the Prussian Academy of Sciences and immediately accepts a visiting professorship at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. Historians still debate whether his decision was driven more by visceral opposition to Nazism or pragmatic concerns for personal safety, but both factors intertwine, propelling him across the Atlantic. In Berlin, colleagues come and go under the weight of oppressive legislation targeting Jewish academics. One quirky detail emerges from those tense final weeks. He mails a postcard to his secretary with a doodle of a fleeing goose, captioned, "Quack away from here," a private joke about migration that betrays his attempt to inject levity into dire circumstances. Yet beneath the humor lies palpable fear. Fear for himself, for his family, and for the future of intellectual freedom in his homeland. Upon arrival in New York in October 1933, he's greeted by a whirlwind of media attention. Newspapers dub him the refugee genius, and crowds gather on the docks, craning to catch a glimpse of the man whose theories shook the scientific establishment. He dons his trademark rumpled suit and unkempt hair, an image so instantly recognizable that photographers vie for candid shots. A quirky but telling moment. He pauses mid-staircase at Ellis Island to adjust a duck-shaped lapel pin given him by a fellow émigré, a gift meant to ward off misfortune, and flashes a rueful grin. Settling into Princeton, he discovers the Institute's serene campus is both sanctuary and stage. His office, once a cramped dorm room and a lecture hall, is now a paneled study filled with towering bookshelves. He fills margins of hardback tomes with sketches of warped grids and geodesic curves, laying groundwork for general relativity's mathematical refinement. Here he finds collaborators like Kurt Gödel and Hermann Weyl, engaging in nightly debates over bourbon in the faculty club. One lesser-known detail, during a particularly spirited discussion about unified field theory, Gödel once challenged him to prove the consistency of his equations without paper. Einstein responded by sketching a vivid 7-step diagram in mid-air, astonishing onlookers. Meanwhile, he confronts culture shock in America. Accustomed to strolls by the R River and café debates in Bern, he now takes long drives through New Jersey farmland, marveling at vast fields of corn and the hum of newfangled automobiles. He quips to friends that modern cars outrank his beloved wooden sailboat for serenity, describing the engine's purr as liquid time, a playful fusion of mechanics and metaphor. These drives become moments of reflection, opportunities to consider how a unified field equation might encompass both gravity and electromagnetism, akin to weaving separate threads into a single tapestry. His status as a public figure intensifies when he speaks out against fascism. In 1939, he co-signs a letter to President Roosevelt, drafted by Leo Szilard, urging the development of atomic research to deter Nazi Germany. This act, both scientific and political, marks a turning point. His mass energy equivalence, once a theoretical curiosity, now carries world-shaping implications. Historians still debate whether his advocacy directly accelerates the Manhattan Project or merely underscores the moral complexity of scientific discovery. Though he champions peace, he grapples with ethical quandaries. In private letters, he expresses remorse over setting into motion forces he cannot control. One quirky detail: he gifts his stepdaughter Margot a small hand-carved wooden dove, inscribed with the phrase, "May reason guide our hands," reflecting his enduring hope that humanity's intellect serve higher ideals. This gesture, blending art and admonition, encapsulates the tension between breakthrough and tragedy that will shadow his legacy. Princeton life offers stability, but also personal solitude. His first wife, Mileva, remains in Zurich, estranged yet linked through shared history. His second cousin, Elsa, joins him and cares for his daily needs, though their relationship skirts the boundaries of privacy. He takes long walks through the Institute's tree-lined paths, pausing to feed squirrels with scraps of cracker, a quirk reflecting his affinity for simple comforts amid upheaval. As Europe descends further into war, he watches international news with mounting dread. In a rare public address in 1940, he laments that scientific genius without moral wisdom is a perilous gift. This open scholarly debate phrase underscores his evolving role. No longer just a physicist, he emerges as a moral philosopher grappling with science's societal impact. By the late 1940s, he has weathered exile's storms, yet he never forgets Ulm or Bern. He retains a tattered map of Europe pinned above his Princeton desk, marked with colored pins showing the displacement of friends and colleagues. That visual reminder fuels his advocacy for refugee scholars and for rebuilding post-war science in a spirit of collaboration. Through laughter with Gödel, bourbon-fueled debates, and solitary drives beneath New Jersey skies, he forges a new chapter in America, a chapter defined by refuge, reflection, and moral resolve. Historians still debate whether his flight from fascism was foremost an act of self-preservation or a conscious stand for intellectual freedom, but the truth likely lies somewhere in the overlap of both. What remains undeniable is that, in stepping away from Europe's tyranny, he carries with him the seeds of resilience and a vision for science as a force for collective good. At the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, he immerses himself in deep theoretical work, transforming a haven of scholarly refuge into a crucible for unification. Widely accepted historical fact records that upon his formal appointment in 1935, he is granted a spacious office in Fould Hall, complete with a green chalkboard that stretches wall to wall, an academic playground unmatched by any patent office cubicle. Historians still debate whether the Institute's relative isolation accelerated his unified field efforts or left him without the laboratory critiques he needed. But the solitude undeniably sharpens his focus on gravity's geometric underpinnings. Each morning, he settles at his desk, surrounded by stacks of journals bearing titles like Physical Review and Proceedings of the Royal Society. A quirky detail emerges in his daily routine. He begins each day by scribbling scientific to-do items on his walking stick, balancing impulses for lofty abstraction with tangible reminders of tasks like review whale correspondence and draft field tensor note. This peculiar mix of erudition and pragmatism underscores the dual nature of his work. Grand vision tempered by meticulous bookkeeping. He launches into his unified field program by revisiting his general relativity equations, searching for a way to weave electromagnetism into spacetime's fabric. He experiments with non-symmetric metric tensors, filling chalkboard after chalkboard with indices and Christoffel symbols. One lesser-known anecdote: he once drew what he called a spaghetti diagram to illustrate the tangled interactions between gravitational and electromagnetic fields, prompting colleagues to nickname it Einstein's pasta. The whimsical label belies the profound challenge he embraces, untangling two fundamental forces into a single mathematical tapestry. Collaboration at the Institute takes unconventional forms. He convenes weekly gravity dinners in his home, inviting mathematician Hermann Weyl, logician Kurt Gödel, and young physicist Oscar Morgenstern. Over simple meals of roast chicken and steamed vegetables, they debate the merits of affine connections versus tensor symmetries. At one such dinner, Gödel teases him for doodling differential forms on the dinner napkin instead of using the chalkboard, to which he quips that paper waste is the price of progress. These gatherings become incubators for new ideas, blending humor and rigor in equal measure. Meanwhile, he maintains correspondence with colleagues worldwide. Letters crisscross the Atlantic daily. In one quirky exchange, he attaches a photograph of his two clacking fountain pens, captioned, "My faithful dueling pens," symbolizing his struggle to reconcile competing theoretical approaches. Yet even as he writes, he acknowledges in a rare margin note that my unified field program remains an open question, a candid admission that even the great Einstein confronts unresolved puzzles. In private lectures at the Institute, he uses a simple analogy to communicate his vision. He compares spacetime to a trampoline surface, warping under the weight of a bowling ball, Earth, and a light bulb, charged particle, simultaneously. He lets the audience gently press fabric beneath both objects, demonstrating how contours overlap. The demonstration, seemingly childlike, clarifies how one field influences the other. Historians still debate whether such analogies inspired later research in gauge theories, but they certainly make abstract concepts tangible for students unaccustomed to pure algebraic abstractions. Late nights find him wandering the Institute's quiet corridors, chalk smudges on his jacket sleeve. He stops at the library stacks to retrieve obscure papers on differential geometry by Ailey Carton, filling margins with questions about torsion and curvature. One quirky detail: he jots down an imagined conversation between Carton and Riemann, debating the merits of their respective formalisms as if they were old friends. This playful mental dramatization reflects his habit of humanizing mathematical giants to grapple with their ideas more naturally. Amid his theoretical pursuits, he continues to mentor promising juniors. He invites budding physicists into his office to challenge their assumptions, posing riddles like, what happens if a charged particle falls into a black hole? His questions often loop back to the foundations of relativity, urging them to test the limits of existing equations. These sessions blend Socratic interrogation with collaborative exploration, laying the groundwork for future breakthroughs like quantum field theory. Despite his singular focus, he remains attuned to broader scientific debates. In a 1937 seminar, he declares, "Historians still debate whether quantization must precede geometry or geometry precedes quantization," signaling his awareness of the unresolved tension between quantum mechanics and relativity. This open scholarly debate phrase invites colleagues to tackle one of 20th century physics' most persistent puzzles: finding a quantum theory of gravity His unified field program yields numerous drafts, but no definitive success. In letters to Leopold Infeld, he expresses both excitement over novel solutions and frustration at dead ends. He jokes that if grand unification eludes him, he might retire to sailboats and violin recitals, hearkening back to youthful diversions that once fueled his imagination. Yet his resolve remains steadfast. Each chalkboard erasure and rewritten tensor brings him closer to an elegant union of forces. As the decade wanes, he reflects on his journey from Ulm's compass-induced wonder to Princeton's ivory towers, mindful that every stage, patents in Bern, lectures in Zurich, refuge in America, has built toward this quest. He pins a small photograph of Mileva and their sons above the chalkboard, a personal reminder that behind every equation lies human context. Whether the unified field program will stand or fade is uncertain, but the pursuit itself cements his legacy as a relentless seeker of nature's deepest symmetries. Beyond the chalk-dusted halls of Princeton, he emerges as a vocal advocate for peace, leveraging his fame to challenge the militaristic currents of his era. Widely accepted historical fact records that during and after World War I, he penned essays condemning nationalism, and in the 1930s, he joined the World Federalist movement to promote global governance as a bulwark against conflict. Historians still debate whether his political engagement diluted his scientific focus or embodied the ethical imperative he believed science demanded. In 1914, as Europe erupted, he publishes Why War? In the London Times, arguing that blind patriotism corrodes reason, a stance that earns him both admiration and ire. One quirky detail: he inscribes the title on a postcard sent to Bertrand Russell, drawing the letters so unevenly that Russell jokes it looks like the scrawl of a distracted schoolboy. Yet the message resonates. He insists that scientific collaboration must transcend national borders, an idea that anticipates later UNESCO initiatives. Decades later, in America, he publicly opposes nuclear weapons after co-signing the 1939 Szilard-Einstein letter. Though he helped spark interest in atomic research to deter Nazi Germany, by 1947 he joins the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists to advocate for international control of nuclear power. In private letters, he expresses regret. In seeking to avert one tyranny, we unleashed a force beyond our moral grasp. This haunting admission underscores the complex interplay between scientific innovation and its societal repercussions. He delivers lectures across the United States, sometimes sharing the podium with figures like Linus Pauling and Eleanor Roosevelt. At one 1948 talk in New York, he uses a simple analogy, comparing the unchecked spread of nuclear arms to an accelerating train without brakes, to galvanize public sentiment. Historians still debate whether such speeches truly shifted policy or mainly preached to sympathetic audiences, but they amplify his role as the scientist-statesman. Away from public forums, he channels activism through essays in the Atlantic Monthly, discussing civil rights and Zionism. One quirky detail surfaces in his essay drafts. He inks marginalia quoting Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, adapting Et tu, Brute, to critique betrayal of democratic ideals. This fusion of literary flourish and political critique reveals the breadth of his intellectual engagement. His activism sometimes strains personal relationships. Elsa, his second wife, worries that his outspoken views risk professional backlash. In letters, she urges caution. Your voice carries weight. Let it not become a target. Historians still debate whether her counsel restrained him or merely highlighted the tension between conscience and career. Yet he persists, believing that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Through radio broadcasts and public debates, he becomes a household name beyond physics. Children imitate his wild hair for Halloween. Editorial cartoons depict him shielding the globe under an umbrella labeled Reason. He collects some of these cartoons in a scrapbook of social commentary, reflecting a quirky delight in cultural artifacts that mirror his influence. By mid-century, as the Cold War intensifies, his calls for global disarmament make him a controversial figure. He writes op-eds urging détente, arguing that peace built on fear is unstable, an open scholarly debate phrase that invites readers to question underlying assumptions. Though governments often ignore his warnings, his words echo in universities and civic organizations committed to peace studies. In melding scientific insight with moral conviction, he defines a model for engaged scholarship. Even as he grapples with incomplete unification of nature's forces, he refuses to divorce science from its human consequences. Through essays, speeches, and personal counsel, he wields his renown as a catalyst for social progress, an embodiment of the belief that the pursuit of knowledge carries responsibilities far beyond the laboratory or lecture hall. Following his arrival in America, his private life enters a new chapter marked by complex family dynamics and the comforting presence of Elsa Lowenthal. Widely accepted historical fact records that Elsa, his first cousin maternally and second cousin paternally, becomes his companion in 1912 and his second wife in 1919. Historians still debate how their familial tie influenced both personal support and insular social circles, but Elsa's steadfast care provides stability during tumultuous years. Elsa moves to Zurich in late 1912 to assist the Einsteins with household duties and to help Mileva care for their sons, Hans Albert and Edward. One quirky detail: Elsa insists on using a vintage brass kettle to boil water for his tea, even when modern electric kettles are available, believing that the old kettle's whistle preserves the water's natural, vibrational harmony. Whether this superstition or sentiment, it becomes a small ritual that Elsa maintains throughout his life, a comforting cadence amid scientific upheaval. As Mileva and Albert drift apart, Elsa and he grow closer. He writes to friends describing Elsa as the anchor in my stormy seas, a metaphor reflecting both emotional refuge and practical support. In letters, he credits her with managing his correspondence, arranging lectures, and even proofreading his public addresses, tasks that free him to focus on theoretical work. One lesser-known anecdote tells of Elsa sizing down his oversized coats so he no longer appears swallowed by fabric during lectures, an act revealing her attention to his public image. Their marriage in June 1919 follows his divorce from Mileva. Elsa's entourage includes her two daughters from her previous marriage, Ilse and Margot, who call him Uncle Albert. Family gatherings at their Berlin home blend spirited dinner conversations on music and mathematics. He plays violin duets with Ilse, while Margot sketches caricatures of his famous mustache. These moments humanize the austere image of the globe-trotting scientist, revealing a man capable of tenderness and playful camaraderie. Yet underlying tensions simmer. His older son, Hans Albert, resents Elsa's role in fracturing the original family unit and struggles with moving between households in Zurich and Berlin. One poignant letter from Hans Albert in 1921 chides him for abandoning our mother's house, highlighting the emotional toll of his remarriage. Historians still debate how much Einstein's scientific zeal contributed to familial fractures versus the separations imposed by academic appointments. Meanwhile, Elsa copes with her own challenges. She navigates the social expectations of an eminent scholar's spouse, hosting diplomats and fellow academics while remaining only the helpmeet in public eyes. In private diaries, she records bouts of loneliness and fears that her value is tied solely to his reputation. A quirky but touching detail. She keeps a scrapbook of newspaper clippings praising his work, labeling it "Our Shared Journey," hinting at pride and private sorrow. In 1922, as he tours Asia and the Middle East, Elsa oversees the household, sending him care packages of homemade strudel and knitted wool socks. He jokes in telegrams that her cooking fuels both body and mind, joking that his brain runs on Austrian apple pastries. Yet the distances strain their bond. Letters sometimes cross in transit, leaving days of silence that each interprets with mounting anxiety. Back in Berlin, they establish a dual residence with separate studies, his lined with physics tomes, hers with poetry and art. One quirky ritual. Each evening, they exchange a single-sentence summary of their day. He writes about equations solved. She writes about a poem composed, reflecting mutual respect for each other's inner worlds. This practice lasts until political exile in 1933, when they relocate together to Princeton. Through personal letters and domestic routines, the contours of their relationship emerge, a blend of familial duty, romantic partnership, and collaborative support. Historians still debate how this dynamic influenced his later emotional reserve and dedication to work. Yet one truth remains: Elsa's unwavering care and insistence on simple comforts, from brass kettles to apple pastries, provided a vital counterpoint to his relentless quest for universal truth. He confronts his own scientific legacy most directly through a series of controversies that pit him against the rising tide of quantum mechanics and test his unwavering belief in an orderly cosmos. Widely accepted historical fact records that from the mid-1920s onward, he engaged in public debates with Niels Bohr over the probabilistic nature of quantum theory, famously asserting, "God does not play dice." Historians still debate whether his resistance to uncertainty reflected deep philosophical conviction or an inability to reconcile his geometric intuition with the abstractions of quantum physics. Their exchanges reach a peak at the 1930 Solvay Conference in Brussels. There, after Bohr presents his complementarity principle, proposing that light and matter exhibit dual wave-particle behavior, he furrows his brow and strokes his wild hair, leaning over the table to ask, "But how can a single entity be both wave and particle at once?" Bohr replies with a gentle smile, countering that nature itself refuses to be pigeonholed. One quirky detail recounted by a student present. He absent-mindedly jots an equation on a cocktail napkin during a cocktail reception, then tries to slide it across to Bohr as if sharing a clandestine secret. The napkin, preserved in the Solvay archive, bears smudged ink and the heading "Uncertainty," a physical testament to the debate's intensity. That same year, he publishes the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen (EPR) paper, arguing that quantum mechanics is an incomplete description of reality because it allows spooky action at a distance. He devises a thought experiment involving two entangled particles whose spin measurements instantly define each other's state, even when separated by miles. A lesser-known anecdote. He illustrates this paradox by comparing it to two violinists who, upon tuning one instrument, find the other spontaneously retuned, leading him to wonder if a musical ether links them beyond space. Historians still debate whether the EPR paper aimed primarily to strengthen classical determinism or to provoke a deeper investigation into quantum foundations. But its legacy endures in modern experiments on entanglement. Meanwhile, his unified field program continues to draw criticism. By the late 1930s, as his efforts to merge gravity with electromagnetism stretch beyond general relativity's elegance, younger physicists grow impatient. In 1938, he submits a draft paper proposing a non-symmetric metric tensor, but receives terse feedback from colleagues who call the approach unnecessarily convoluted. One quirky detail: he refers to his own draft as my labyrinth, joking that even he risks getting lost in its corridors of indices and covariant derivatives. Nonetheless, he persists, believing that a truly unified theory must reconcile all interactions under one geometric umbrella. During World War II, his controversies take on new weight. He expresses concern that quantum uncertainty might justify unchecked authority in weapons development, writing privately that, if chance governs atomic behavior, how can we trust leaders to control it? This philosophical unease bleeds into his scientific critiques. He remains convinced that quantum mechanics, powerful though it is, ultimately points toward a deeper, deterministic layer. Historians still debate whether his political anxieties fueled his scientific stubbornness or whether his convictions predated global conflict, but the intertwining of moral and intellectual resistance defines this era of his thought. After the war, Bohr's Copenhagen interpretation gains widespread acceptance, and quantum mechanics spawns transformative technologies like transistors and radar. He watches these developments with mixed pride and apprehension. In a rare radio interview, he acknowledges quantum theory's practical triumphs, calling them wonders of the 20th century, but cautions that an incomplete map of reality may one day mislead us. His remarks spark letters from engineers and physicists, some praising his foresight, others accusing him of Luddite skepticism. Among these responses is a playful postcard from Wolfgang Pauli, caricaturing him as an old sage clutching a cayenne pepper shaker labeled certainty, underlining Pauli's belief that even pepper, like electrons, follows probabilistic rules. Despite growing isolation from mainstream physics, he remains intellectually generous. He mentors young theorists like Nathan Rosen and engages in correspondence with Erwin Schrödinger about alternative wave mechanical models. He muses in letters that perhaps probability is a stepping stone toward a deeper geometry of phase space. Such reflections blend humility with defiance, suggesting that his critiques aim not to undermine progress, but to propel it toward new horizons. In 1952, he tackles the quantum measurement problem head-on in a public lecture at the Institute for Advanced Study. Standing before an audience of eager students and veteran scholars, he sketches the Schrödinger's cat paradox on the chalkboard, using a crude charcoal stick drawing of a cat half alive, half dead in a sealed box. After one student laughs at the macabre cartoon, he grants a wry smile and says, "Whether the cat purrs or not, we have yet to agree on what the question truly means." That quip, both playful and pointed, encapsulates his enduring belief that conceptual clarity must precede technical mastery. As his health declines in the early 1950s, he continues to write essays questioning the philosophical underpinnings of quantum mechanics. In a final paper submitted shortly before his death in 1955, he speculates on a probabilistic continuum, an idea blending classical fields with quantum amplitudes. Though the paper remains unpublished until decades later, archival scans reveal scribbled notes likening the continuum to a mosaic of probabilities, each tile a possible universe. Historians still debate whether this late conjecture foreshadows modern multiverse theories or merely reflects a winding retreat from mainstream physics, but the notion resonates with later work in quantum cosmology. Through these scientific controversies, relentless debates with Bohr, the EPR challenge, the elusive unified field quest, he remains a towering figure who refuses to let science rest on unresolved tensions. His quibbles with quantum indeterminacy and geometric unification cast a long shadow over 20th century physics, prompting successive generations to ask deeper questions. And though many of his positions ultimately yield to experimental vindication of quantum mechanics or surrender before mathematical complexity, his role as contrarian catalyst cements his legacy as a thinker who dared to question not only the universe, but our understanding of how we know it. As his scientific stature soars, he transcends academia to become a cultural phenomenon, his image and persona woven into the fabric of popular consciousness. Widely accepted historical fact, records that by the 1930s, his likeness appears on countless magazine covers, posters, and novelty items, from cigarette cards to caricatured bobblehead dolls, cementing his status as the quintessential genius archetype. Historians still debate whether this celebrity diluted appreciation for his serious work or served as a gateway, inspiring the public to engage with complex science. In Paris cafés, patrons order an Einstein espresso, a double shot said to energize the mind, while artists sketch his unruly hair and mischievous grin on napkins. One quirky detail: a Montmartre street vendor crafts wooden Einstein masks with movable tongues, playfully referencing the iconic 1951 photograph. These masks reportedly outsell every other souvenir in the post-war years. Although he privately detests being reduced to a prop, he secretly enjoys the creativity his image spawns, once remarking to a friend that, "If cartoons drive one child to ask why, then I forgive them anything." The silver screen also embraces him. In 1938's French comedy Le Professeur Farfelu, a bumbling scientist with wild hair and a penchant for nonsensical equations is clearly modeled on him. Audiences laugh as the character's laboratory blows up in a puff of smoke, though real-life anecdotes reveal he actually set off a minor explosion while experimenting with sugar and nitric acid as a youth. Historians still debate whether such fictional portrayals trivialize scientific endeavor or celebrate the playful curiosity at its core. In America, late-night radio shows feature actors impersonating his accent and intoning mock equations. "Ladies and gentlemen, E equals mpg times c squared." Despite the caricature, these skits introduce relativity to listeners who might never pick up a physics text. One lesser-known detail: he records a guest spot on a 1945 radio program, reading a children's story. He wrote about a curious squirrel that learns about gravity, an experiment in public outreach long before edutainment became a buzzword. Magazines run quizzes asking, "Which Einstein are you?" Profiling personality traits from the daydreamer to the debunker. Fans send in letters describing their dreams of meeting him at a bookstore signing. He attends only a handful of public events, most famously a 1935 book fair in Berlin, where he patiently signs thousands of copies of Relativity, the Special, and the General Theory. A quirky anecdote recalls a young fan slipping a piece of sheet music into the signing stack. When he recognizes the melody, he pauses to hum a few bars, delighting onlookers with an impromptu concert. His image also finds its way into children's education. In grammar school classrooms across Europe and North America, teachers hang posters of him with captions like, "Curiosity builds the future," and "Think differently." One anecdote tells of a British teacher who, frustrated by her class, dons a fake mustache and hairpiece, declaring herself Professor Einstein and launching a physics lesson that had even the most distracted pupils captivated. Historians still debate whether this iconography oversimplifies his work or powerfully democratizes scientific inspiration. Beyond merchandise and media, he becomes a symbol in political cartoons. In 1948, An editorial cartoon shows him lecturing Uncle Sam on the perils of nuclear stockpiles. His wild-haired silhouette looms large behind a lectern, pointing a chalk to a graph titled Doomsday. Such imagery reinforces his authority not only on physics, but on moral and global issues. He collects these cartoons in scrapbooks, some tallying over 400 entries, reflecting his fascination with how society frames intellect and responsibility. Music and poetry join the homage. A 1942 folk ballad, Einstein's Dream, imagines him drifting through the cosmos on a light beam, singing about time's elasticity. Though never a commercial hit, the song circulates among university students as a cult favorite. In 1953, a Mexican muralist paints a sprawling fresco depicting him walking alongside indigenous scholars, symbolizing a universal quest for knowledge that transcends culture and geography, an expression of his own cosmopolitan values. Despite this saturation, he retains a streak of self-awareness. He writes in a 1952 letter to a young admirer, "I prefer my work to speak for me, but if my hair convinces a child that science can be wild and wonderful, then let it stand on end." This quirky embrace of his own image acknowledges the power of visual myth-making in an increasingly image-driven world. By mid-century, Einstein becomes shorthand for gifted intellect, an adjective as familiar as Mona Lisa for enigmatic beauty. Advertisers even market a line of household appliances under the slogan, "Powered by Einstein's Spirit," though he vehemently threatens legal action, prompting the company to rename the products. Historians still debate whether such commercial appropriation cheapened his legacy or underscored the public's hunger for scientific identity. Through caricatures, radio skits, posters, and folk songs, he transcends the lab to become the world's most recognizable scientist. His transformation into a pop culture icon illustrates the delicate balance between myth and reality. While playful portrayals risk trivializing his rigorous work, they also ignite curiosity, turning abstract theories into compelling narratives. And perhaps, in that alchemy of science and spectacle, lies one of his lasting legacies, that even the loftiest concepts can find a place in everyday imagination. In his later years, he often retreats from public stages to contemplative quiet, musing on the philosophical dimensions of his lifelong quest. Widely accepted historical fact holds that after World War II, he spends substantial time at his Princeton home on Mercer Street, corresponding with scholars worldwide and reflecting on the broader implications of his theories. Historians still debate whether this period of reflection fueled his late intellectual forays or simply marked a graceful winding down of his public career. Each morning, he rises before dawn and settles at his teak writing desk, overlooking a small garden he tended with Elsa. A quirky detail. He paints a tiny wooden birdhouse and mounts it on the windowsill, claiming that observing actual birds helps him tune the mind's flight patterns when grappling with abstract thought. In letters to friends, he notes that the simple chirping melodies offer a biological counterpoint to the elegant yet austere symmetries of his equations. During these reflective hours, he revisits correspondence with former rivals. He virtually reopens debates with Niels Bohr, Albert Schweitzer, and Bertrand Russell, musing whether his discomfort with quantum indeterminacy was a personal blind spot or a vital catalyst for rigorous scrutiny. An open scholarly debate phrase surfaces in his journals. Whether uncertainty will yield to deeper determinism remains unsettled, he writes, inviting successors to carry forward the discourse he began. One lesser-known anecdote from this period involves his violin. He restores an old miniature violin, once a childhood toy, and keeps it on his desk. When letter-writing stalls, he picks it up, drawing a single mournful bow across its strings. A visiting colleague recalls how the plaintive notes echo through the house, blending solace and sorrow in equal measure. To him, the instrument embodies the harmony and discord at the heart of scientific creativity. In public interviews, he juxtaposes his youthful boldness with mature humility. He tells a reporter in 1949 that he once believed a single equation could capture all of nature, but now concedes that the universe's richness may defy complete encapsulation. This remark, widely quoted in biographies, reflects a shift from confident revolutionary to reflective elder, acknowledging the limits of human understanding. He also revisits earlier thought experiments, refining their wording in private notebooks. In a quirk reminiscent of his burn days, he drafts a train and mirror scenario on hotel stationery during a lecture tour, tweaking the details to account for non-inertial frames, a precursor to general relativity's gravitational redshift. Historians still debate whether these late adjustments signal his deepening insight or a nostalgic replay of past triumphs, but they underscore his enduring engagement with foundational puzzles. Among his final public appearances is a 1953 address at the New School for Social Research in New York City. There, he delivers a lecture titled Science and Human Values, blending anecdotes from his career with pleas for moral vigilance. He recounts the mustard-draped baguette in Paris and the swan reflections by the Aar River, weaving them into a narrative about curiosity's double edge, how it can illuminate yet also endanger. That talk concludes with an open, scholarly debate phrase: will our discoveries elevate or imperil our species? The answer is not yet written. Behind closed doors, he mentors young scholars like John Wheeler, encouraging them to explore the nexus of relativity and quantum mechanics. He hosts evening seminars in his study, peppering conversations with playful analogies, comparing entangled particles to quantum dance partners who never miss a step. One attendee recalls how he once burst into laughter mid-discussion, scribbling a cartoon of two electrons wearing top hats, as if at a formal gala. Such episodes reveal a man who, even in twilight years, finds joy in scientific whimsy. In his final notebooks, he sketches what he calls a cosmic symphony, a poetic metaphor for unifying physical laws with aesthetic grace. He annotates it alongside mathematical notes, suggesting that beauty might guide truth as much as logic does. Historians still debate whether this late emphasis on aesthetic criteria represents a philosophical turn or simply his lifelong penchant for metaphor. But it caps a career defined by the interplay of rigor and imagination. Throughout these later reflections, he remains acutely aware of his journey's arc, from questioning a compass's needle as a child to inspiring future generations to question reality itself. In a 1954 letter to a former student, he writes, "I began as a wayfarer chasing light beams. Now I end as a pilgrim seeking harmony between thought and experience." This quixotic phrasing captures the essence of his intellectual pilgrimage, marrying poetic flourish with scientific gravitas. As he soaks in these twilight reflections, bird song and violin chords mingling with the hum of Princeton evenings, he stands at the convergence of memory and aspiration. His legacy, however incomplete, echoes in the unsolved questions he leaves behind, questions that continue to beckon curious minds to follow his path. In his final years, he confronts both the weight of his achievements and the fragility of mortal life, weaving together reflection and farewell in a tapestry of human frailty and cosmic grandeur. Widely accepted historical fact records that in 1952, at the age of 73, he suffers the first of several health setbacks, including abdominal aortic aneurysm surgery, and declines further invasive treatment, choosing instead to spend his remaining time in intellectual pursuit. Historians still debate whether this decision reflects a stoic acceptance of fate or a profound desire to focus on thought rather than bodily preservation. Despite physical discomfort, he maintains an unbroken routine of morning reflection, greeting each day with a cup of weak tea brewed in Elsa's trusted brass kettle. A quirky detail from this era: he keeps a small notebook by his bedside titled Last Thoughts, into which he scribbles aphorisms on time, memory, and the human condition. One entry reads, "Life's brevity sharpens clarity. Like a supernova that briefly outshines a galaxy, we burn bright, then fade." This poetic flourish underscores his lifelong habit of reframing scientific insight as metaphysical meditation. In early 1953, he receives word that the Herschel telescope has detected unexpected stellar redshifts, data hinting at an expanding universe that challenges even his general relativity equations. He reacts with characteristic curiosity rather than defensiveness. Writing to a young astrophysicist, "New observations may demand new terms. Let us not treat our theories as immutable laws, but as provisional maps of a shifting terrain." An open scholarly debate phrase that invites successors to refine cosmological models rather than revere past victories. His correspondence during these years remains prolific. He exchanges letters with burgeoning thinkers like Richard Feynman and Freeman Dyson, offering cryptic encouragement. Continue to question the unthinkable. In one letter stamped May 1954, he includes a hand-drawn diagram of a Mobius strip, annotating it "Universe's single surface," suggesting playful speculation on topology's role in cosmic architecture. Historians still debate whether these late musings anticipate modern theories of space-time topology or simply reflect his enduring penchant for geometric metaphor. Amid intellectual vigor, his domestic world grows quieter. Elsa's health also declines, and he becomes fiercely protective, lightening his own schedule to care for her. One lesser-known anecdote recounts how, in the winter of 1954, he and Elsa share a single room in Princeton Hospital. Throughout long nights, he plays gentle violin tunes to soothe her, transforming the sterile ward into a sanctuary of memory and melody. That image of the scientist as caregiver inverts common narratives of genius divorced from emotion. Public engagements become scarce but poignant. His final lecture, delivered via recorded broadcast at Princeton in November 1954, touches on the ethical ramifications of scientific advance. He warns that knowledge untempered by wisdom risks unleashing forces we cannot control, a solemn echo of his earlier atomic appeals. The address is transcribed and circulated widely, inspiring what would later become clusters of peace and ethics institutes. Historians still debate the tangible impact of these remarks on academic curricula, but the speech cements his reputation as a moral philosopher as well as a theoretical physicist. In private reflection, he returns to early thought experiments, redrafting his classic train and mirror scenario with margin notes questioning how non-inertial frames might manifest near black holes. He jots, "What if the train itself is spacetime's vessel?" Blending childhood curiosity with sophisticated relativistic insight. This reiteration of his foundational ideas, childlike wonder meeting mathematical rigor, illuminates the cyclical nature of his intellectual journey. As winter turns to spring 1955, his strength wanes. He spends increasing hours in his study surrounded by books and photographs, images of Ulm's compass, Bern's riverbanks, Zurich's lecture halls, and Princeton's chalkboards. A quirky postscript from his final days. He pins a color photograph of a hummingbird hovering beside a flower to his desk lamp, annotating it nature's swift equilibrium, perhaps a metaphor for his own pursuit of balance between energy and mass, theory and life. On April 17, 1955, he passes away peacefully in Princeton, his final words reportedly a gentle murmur of appreciation for Elsa's presence at his side. In the days that follow, colleagues and admirers converge to honor him. Friends recall the gravity dinners, violin duets, mustard-drizzled baguettes, and riverbank epiphanies that humanized the legend. Obituaries worldwide celebrate both the transcendent equations he bequeathed and the quirky humanity he embodied. His funeral is a modest affair, attended by family, longtime assistants, and fellow institute members. They scatter his ashes at an undisclosed location, fulfilling his wish for a private farewell. Historians still debate whether the secrecy honors his desire for humility or obscures potential for public memorialization, but the gesture resonates with his lifelong balance of openness in thought and privacy in person. In the months afterward, his unpublished papers are compiled and published posthumously, including his late Last Thoughts entries and Einstein-Infeld correspondence. Scholars pore over these volumes, finding in them both unfinished equations and poetic musings that continue to provoke reinterpretation. His legacy, like the Mobius strip he sketched, forms an unending loop. Each generation returns to his work, reframing it for new frontiers, from the compass that first stirred his wonder to the final notebook that captured his twilight reflections. His life completes a circle of inquiry and imagination. Though he departed after only 2 hours' worth of narrative in this chronicle of his life, love, and legacy, the questions he posed about time, reality, ethics, and the human spirit remain ever ripe for exploration. He stands at the threshold of legacy, contemplating the arc of a life that began with a child's fascination and concluded with questions that continue to shape our world. From the compass needle that captivated his toddler self in Ulm to the Mobius strip speculations of his final years in Princeton, his journey weaves together wonder, rigor, and moral urgency. Over nearly 8 decades, he transformed from a solitary patent clerk daydreaming beside the Aire River into the most celebrated scientist of the 20th century, an evolution rooted in restless curiosity, relentless questioning, and an unshakable belief in the power of thought. First, we trace the through line of inquiry, a pattern of observation, thought experiment, and mathematical insight that recurs at every stage of his life. As a boy, he peered at his father's compass and intuited invisible forces. As a young clerk, he chased light beams over Bern's rooftops. As a fledgling academic, he sketched train and lightning scenarios on examination tickets. As a global icon, he invited children to wonder whether a cat could be both alive and dead, all variations on a single theme. That theme is the conviction that nature yields its deepest truths, not through rote formulas, but through imaginative exploration cast in mathematical form. His Miracle Year papers, General Relativity's geometric vision, and the later unified field ambitions all spring from this same source. The belief that intellectual play, grounded in empirical fact, can crack open reality's hidden architecture. Second, we reflect on the interplay of personal relationships and professional breakthroughs. His bond with Mileva blends love, intellectual partnership, and later tension, an emotional crucible in which early ideas were forged and tested. Elsa's careful stewardship of his domestic world, from brass kettle tea rituals to apple strudel care packages, provided stability when patent office solitude gave way to academic celebrity. Friends like Planck and Gödel offered both collaboration and candor, tempering his grand visions with rigorous critique. Even his playful interactions at gravity dinners or violin interludes at hospital bedsides reveal a scientist who never relegated human emotion to the margins of his work. These relationships underscore a central truth. His achievements did not arise in a vacuum, but in concert with spouses, mentors, colleagues, and even critics whose influences ripple through his equations and letters. Third, his life exemplifies the dynamic between scientific discovery and moral responsibility. From early pacifist essays during World War I to the fateful Szilard-Einstein letter that helped trigger atomic research, he grapples with the double-edged nature of knowledge. His mass-energy equivalence, E equals mc squared, becomes both a theoretical marvel and a harbinger of vast, destructive potential. The moral reflections that follow, his advocacy for global disarmament, his warnings against nationalism, his entreaties for international scientific cooperation, demonstrate that intellectual insight cannot be divorced from ethical considerations. He models a form of engaged scholarship, a public scientist who understands that ideas, once unleashed, take on lives of their own, and that the quest for truth carries with it the duty to guide its applications toward the common good. Fourth, his controversies, most notably his resistance to quantum uncertainty, highlight the constructive tension between dissent and consensus in scientific progress. His famous EPR argument and his "God does not play dice" pronouncements shrewdly expose quantum mechanics' philosophical lacuna, spurring generations of physicists to probe the foundations of indeterminacy. While Bohr's Copenhagen interpretation ultimately prevailed in practice, Einstein's rigorous discomfort ensured that debates over locality, hidden variables, and measurement precision endured, eventually catalyzing experimental tests of Bell's inequalities and fostering the quantum information revolution. His contrarian stance thus transformed skepticism into a driver of innovation, reminding us that a field advances not only through agreement, but through sharp critique and relentless probing of assumptions. Fifth, his cultural ascendancy, to a pop culture icon whose wild hair and tongue-sticking photograph outlive his equations, reveals how scientific myth-making can inspire broad audiences, even at the risk of oversimplification. His caricatured image in comics and commercials, his portrayal as the ultimate genius, and the Einstein espresso quips in Paris cafés show how society craves symbols of intellect. Yet beneath the myth persisted a man who valued humility, who collected cartoons and scrapbooks, and who quipped that if his hair made children curious, he happily accepted the playful distortions. His life thus offers a lesson in the power and perils of celebrity, that public fascination can open doors to education and engagement, but also demands that the subject retain a clear voice about the nuance behind the image. Finally, the cyclical quality of his intellectual pilgrimage, from compass to notebook, thought experiment to public lecture, underscores a legacy defined not simply by solved equations, but by the enduring questions he posed. What does time really mean? How do geometry and matter coalesce into gravity? Do we live in a deterministic cosmos, or one woven from probabilistic threads? These questions remain open, inviting each generation to explore new methods, from quantum gravity research to cosmological observations of an expanding universe. His final admonition, that we treat scientific theories as provisional maps of a shifting terrain, remains as relevant now as it did when he scribbled that note on hotel stationery. In retracing these strands, curiosity and creativity, personal intimacy and public engagement, scientific breakthroughs and moral engagement, constructive dissent and cultural myth, we glimpse the full tapestry of a life lived at the crossroads of human values and cosmic inquiry. As we transition to the concluding reflections, We carry forward not just a portrait of a towering intellect, but a portrait of a deeply human thinker, ever poised between wonder and responsibility, equation and ethic. As we move from reflection into forward-looking resonance, we enter the second half of his concluding legacy, an exploration of how his life continues to shape our world, the enduring questions he bequeathed, and the invitation his journey extends to future explorers of nature and conscience. First, his methodological fusion of thought experiment and empirical testing becomes a template for modern theoretical physics. Today's researchers in quantum field theory, string theory, and quantum gravity routinely invoke conceptual experiments, black hole information paradoxes, multiverse thought scenarios, and holographic dualities that echo his early train and mirror puzzles. By demonstrating that pure reasoning anchored in well-defined assumptions can yield testable predictions, he paved the way for disciplines that now blend abstract mathematics with cutting-edge experiments, from particle accelerators probing Higgs bosons to tabletop tests of quantum entanglement. His insistence on clarity, forcing practitioners to articulate every assumption, remains a hallmark of rigorous theorizing. Second, his ethical stance on science's societal role reverberates in contemporary debates over artificial intelligence, genetic editing, and climate engineering. As we face moral quandaries about CRISPR edits in embryos or AI's influence on democratic processes, we confront the same imperative he championed: that knowledge without wisdom risks peril. Organizations like the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, with its doomsday clock, trace their lineage to the atomic era warnings he helped inaugurate. Ethics boards at universities, policy frameworks for AI governance, and climate change accords all reflect the ethos he personified: that scientists must engage beyond laboratories, shaping public discourse and policy in tandem with discovery. Third, his life story underscores the centrality of openness and international collaboration in science. From his Swiss-German academic circuit to Princeton's émigré community, he thrived on cross-border exchange, a powerful antidote to parochialism. In an age when global challenges transcend national boundaries, from pandemics to cybersecurity threats, his example argues for institutions that foster open data sharing, international mobility of scholars, and inclusive research partnerships. The European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, the Human Genome Project, and the International Space Station all embody this principle, tracing their collaborative DNA back to the spirit of inquiry he championed. Fourth, the personal dimensions of his legacy. His relationships with Mileva, Elsa, colleagues, and protégés highlight the importance of mentorship and support networks in nurturing groundbreaking ideas. Today's programs for underrepresented groups in STEM, mentorship initiatives in universities, and family-friendly policies for academic careers reflect lessons drawn from his life. His partnership with Mileva suggests that truly transformative ideas often emerge through intellectual companionship. Elsa's stewardship shows that stable home environments enable sustained creativity, and his gravity dinners model demonstrates how informal gatherings can incubate high-risk ideas. These human factors remain vital components of innovation ecosystems worldwide. Fifth, his cultural iconography and his ability to harness it for public engagement prefigures modern science communication strategies. Podcasts, popular science books, television documentaries, and social media personalities replicate the fusion of accuracy and storytelling that he embodied when he wrote children's radio scripts or spoke in layperson's analogies. His example encourages scientists and communicators today to balance technical precision with narrative flair, transforming arcane concepts into accessible, emotionally resonant stories that inspire broader public participation in science. Sixth, the unresolved puzzles he left behind, the nature of dark energy, the reconciliation of quantum mechanics with general relativity, the origins of cosmic inflation, serve as direct successors to his lifelong quest. Initiatives like the Event Horizon Telescope's imaging of black holes, LIGO's detection of gravitational waves, and CERN's high-luminosity upgrades stand on the shoulders of his geometric insights. Each experimental breakthrough, each theoretical advance, echoes the pattern he exemplified. Empirical surprise prompting conceptual upheaval, leading to deeper, more comprehensive frameworks. Seventh, his personal reflections in Last Thoughts, the aphorisms, the birdhouse-tuned mornings, the Mobius strip speculations, remind us that creativity often flourishes at the margins, in moments of aesthetic pleasure, as much as in formal analysis. Modern innovation labs incorporate art science residencies, meditative makerspaces, and interdisciplinary residencies precisely because they recognize that cross-pollination with the arts can spark scientific leaps. His birdhouse garden, violin-soothed hospital wards, and afternoon tea rituals illustrate the holistic interplay of sensory experience and intellectual labor. Eighth, the cyclical narrative of his life, beginning with childlike wonder and ending in reflective wisdom, offers a human-centered framework for lifelong learning. As educational systems embrace inquiry-based curricula, project-based learning, and Socratic pedagogy, they draw upon the same principles that animated his approach: nurturing curiosity, framing big questions, and using metaphor to build understanding. His own experiences as a boy labeled daydreamer and later as an esteemed lecturer underscore that effective education must accommodate both imaginative play and disciplined rigor. Finally, and most poignantly, his enduring challenge to future generations is encapsulated in the simple open question he posed in his final public address. Will our discoveries elevate or imperil our species? That question, cast as an invitation rather than a warning, remains the ultimate legacy of a life spent probing the cosmos and the human heart. Each time we map a new particle, edit a gene, or model a climate scenario, we stand before the same fork: to wield knowledge responsibly or to unleash unintended harm. His life, from Ulm to Princeton, teaches us that the pursuit of truth is inseparable from the pursuit of wisdom. In honoring his memory, we do more than celebrate equations and accolades. We commit ourselves to a tradition that prizes wonder, demands ethical engagement, and embraces the full humanity of inquiry. The compass that once guided him at age 5 now points toward a horizon of collective responsibility. As we carry forward his questions about time's nature, reality's texture, and the moral contours of discovery, we become actors in his unfinished symphony. And so the legacy he crafted, part scientific masterpiece and part moral testament, continues to unfold in each curious mind that asks, circles back, and dares to imagine anew.